A political storm was already brewing in Washington when the hearing began, but no one inside that room expected the moment that would bring everything to a standstill. It happened the instant Senator Mazie Hirono leaned forward, fixed her gaze on Pam Bondi, and delivered a question so direct and so heavy that the chamber went completely quiet. This wasn't performance or political theater. It felt like a door had been forced open, exposing the inner workings of the Justice Department in real time. As the exchange unfolded, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not a routine oversight hearing. The discussion began calmly, almost politely. Bondi thanked Senator Hirono and her staff, expressing appreciation for their cooperation and for the hearing itself. There was talk of working together on Section 702, with Bondi signaling openness to further discussion and possible amendments. On the surface, it sounded collaborative, but that tone did not last long. Hirono quickly shifted gears. She reminded Bondi of her confirmation hearing, where Bondi had stated clearly that decisions about prosecution rest with the Department of Justice, not the President. Then Hirono laid out a timeline that immediately raised alarms. Last month, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia was forced out. Soon after, President Trump posted a message publicly asking, "What about Comey?" Hirono pointed out that the message appeared to be directed at Pam Bondi. Bondi acknowledged that it likely was within days of that post. A new U.S. Attorney was appointed, and an indictment against James Comey followed almost immediately. Hirono didn't soften her words. She said it appeared that when the president made such public demands, he treated the Department of Justice as his personal law firm and Bondi as his lawyer. The implication hung heavily in the air. Then Hirono escalated further. She brought up a separate incident involving Tom Homan, the former border official. Video footage showed Homan accepting a bag containing $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents after suggesting he could help with government contracts. To many Americans, Hirono said that looked like a bribe. Yet, just 2 weeks earlier, the Justice Department reportedly shut down the bribery. Investigation into Homan, Hirono asked Bondi directly whether she approved closing that investigation. Bondi responded by repeating that the DOJ and FBI had conducted a thorough review and found no credible evidence of wrongdoing. But instead of stopping there, she pivoted, bringing up Hirono's past presence at a protest and implying a connection to extremist groups. The move landed awkwardly and did nothing to answer the original question. Hirono pushed back immediately. She clarified that her question was simple and specific. Did Bondi approve shutting down the Homan investigation? She noted that the FBI reports to the Attorney General, making it reasonable to assume Bondi had final authority. Hirono then spelled out what the public would see: a man caught on video taking $50,000 in cash. An investigation quietly closed and testimony claiming nothing improper occurred. Following that logic, Hirono said the only conclusion left was that Homan kept the money. She added pointedly that she hoped he reported it as income on his tax returns. The room absorbed the weight of that statement before Hirono moved on to her next line of questioning, turning to the more than 1,200 individuals convicted in connection with January 6. By that point, the tone of the hearing had completely changed. What began as formal cooperation had turned into a sharp examination of power, independence, and accountability. The silence between answers spoke as loudly as the questions themselves, reinforcing the sense that this exchange had pulled back the curtain on issues far deeper than a standard congressional hearing. President Trump has since pardoned nearly all of the individuals convicted in connection with January 6th, and that alone raised serious concerns. But the situation didn't stop there. Just last month, reports surfaced that an attorney representing January 6th defendants had met with senior Department of Justice officials to discuss the possibility of creating a compensation fund. Not just any fund, but one modeled after the program Congress established after 9/11's. A fund meant to compensate the very people convicted for their roles in the attack. Senator Hirono went straight to the point. She asked Bondi clearly and directly whether anyone at the Department of Justice was considering setting up a compensation fund for January 6th defendants. She asked for a simple yes or no. Bondi responded that she had not participated in any meetings or discussions about such a fund. Hirono followed up immediately asking whether Bondi would support or approve a fund like that. Bondi avoided giving an opinion, saying that Hirono could send her information and she would be happy to review it. That answer clearly wasn't enough. Hirono pressed further, explaining exactly why the question mattered. She pointed out that if senior DOJ officials were already meeting with lawyers about such a fund, then refusing to state a position publicly was troubling. To Hirono, the idea that discussions could be happening behind closed doors while Congress was kept in the dark was deeply concerning. She made it clear that this lack of transparency was hard to believe. Hirono then shifted to antitrust enforcement and laid out another troubling pattern. On January 30th of this year, the Trump Justice Department's Antitrust Division sued to block a merger between two technology companies. Shortly after, a powerful lobbyist met with DOJ political leadership. Career staff were overruled, and the merger was approved through a settlement. Hirono then connected that case to another major lawsuit. Last year, DOJ sued Ticketmaster for monopolizing the concert ticket market and forcing consumers to pay excessive fees. Ticketmaster, she noted, had hired the very same lobbyists who met with DOJ. Political officials in the earlier tech merger case. Hirono asked a straightforward question. Had those lobbyists also met with DOJ political deputies about the Ticketmaster case? Bondi refused to answer, stating that she would not discuss ongoing matters. She instead praised the head of the Antitrust Division, saying the unit was doing excellent work. But Hirono continued, suggesting it was highly likely that the same lobbyists were again attempting to influence DOJ decisions. Rather than respond to the substance, Bondi deflected, bringing up Hirono's past protests and making an unrelated political remark before abruptly calling for the next question. Hirono then turned to personnel decisions inside the Department of Justice. She stated that dozens of career prosecutors had been fired after working on cases involving President Trump or January 6th defendants. She gave a specific example of a federal prosecutor who secured more than 100 convictions in Florida and also worked on January 6th cases in Washington, D.C. That prosecutor received an outstanding performance review just 2 days before Bondi signed a memo firing him. The memo, Hirono noted, gave no reason for the termination. Her question was direct and serious. Were career prosecutors being fired simply because they worked on cases the president did not like? Bondi refused to discuss personnel matters. Hirono responded by pointing out that hundreds of career prosecutors had reportedly left the DOJ, taking with them decades of experience prosecuting criminals. She questioned whether that loss of expertise could possibly make the country safer. Bondi replied that many employees chose to resign and that DOJ was now hiring prosecutors who would come into the office, work in person, and focus on prosecuting violent criminals and terrorists. She said she was proud of the department's work. As time ran out, Hirono attempted to continue her line of questioning, but Bondi cut in, accusing her of repeated interruptions. By that point, the pattern was unmistakable. Question after question met deflection, refusal, or unrelated responses. What viewers witnessed was not just a heated exchange, but a growing divide between demands for accountability and an unwillingness to provide clear answers. In her closing statement, Senator Hirono did not hold back. She said plainly that what was once known as the Department of Justice now resembled something far more troubling in her view, a department of revenge and corruption. She argued that instead of pursuing justice without fear or favor, the DOJ appeared to protect the president's allies while intimidating those seen as his opponents. According to Hirono, if someone was a friend of the president, the department would bend over backward to help them. If they were not, they would face aggressive action regardless of the facts, the law, or basic fairness. She pointed to specific examples to support her claim. The bribery investigation into Tom Homan was dropped. Discussions reportedly took place about compensating January 6th defendants with public funds. Antitrust enforcement decisions, she said, were being influenced by powerful, well-connected lobbyists rather than career experts. On the other hand, people viewed as political enemies faced swift and severe consequences. James Comey was indicted just days after a presidential social media post calling for action. Experienced career prosecutors were fired simply because they worked on January 6th cases. States led by Democrats were sued to obtain highly sensitive voter data. While Republican-led states were left untouched. To Hirono, the pattern was unmistakable. She said the double standard was obvious, and that the American people were beginning to see the corruption, favoritism, and lawlessness taking hold within the Justice Department. She thanked the chairman and concluded her remarks. Bondi immediately asked to respond. The chairman allowed it. Bondi pushed back hard, saying the real double standard was crystal clear in her view. She accused Hirono and others of staying silent for years while President Trump was, according to her, unfairly targeted by Special Counsel Jack Smith and the previous Justice Department. Bondi claimed the American people had spoken decisively by re-electing Trump and declared that what she called a two-tiered justice system was now over. What unfolded next was not calm debate or respectful disagreement. It was a public collision, raw and revealing, over whether the nation's justice system still serves the people or quietly bends toward power. Hirono didn't ease into her questioning. She went straight for the most sensitive decisions, the cases that disappeared without explanation and the indictments that seemed to arrive at politically convenient moments. Bondi remained composed, delivering answers that sounded controlled and carefully chosen, sometimes so polished they felt rehearsed for viewers watching at home. It quickly became clear that something deeper was playing out. This was not just a policy dispute. It was a struggle over truth, accountability, and independence. With every question, another layer was peeled back. The tension didn't begin with the explosive accusations everyone expected. It started with something that sounded technical and procedural. FISA Section 702, Hirono asked whether Bondi supported stronger safeguards to prevent the government from collecting Americans' private communications. Bondi defended Section 702 as essential to national security, insisting the department respected civil liberties and was open to working with Congress on reforms. Her response sounded smooth, disciplined, and well-rehearsed, but Hirono was far from finished. She pivoted quickly to cases that had stunned legal experts nationwide. These were decisions where prosecutions and dismissals appeared to line up too neatly with political interests. Bondi kept her voice steady, but visible strain began to emerge, especially when Hirono raised the case of a former official caught on video, accepting a bag filled with $50,000 from undercover agents. At that moment, the gap between the questions and the answers became impossible to ignore, according to multiple reports. The investigation was abruptly shut down. No charges were filed. No public explanation was given. That was the moment Senator Hirono stopped the room again and asked the question many people were already asking at home. Does someone really just walk away from something like that? Bondi responded by insisting there was no credible evidence of wrongdoing. But to many watching, the explanation didn't fit the facts, and Hirono pressed forward. Each follow-up carried more weight than the last. For the first time, Bondi's steady cadence slipped. Not because she stayed silent, but because every answer seemed to create new doubts instead of resolving old ones. Hirono then turned to another troubling issue. She referenced reports of meetings between high-level Justice Department officials and attorneys, representing individuals involved in a major political riot. Online discussions and media reports had raised a serious question. Had anyone inside the DOJ discussed creating a compensation fund for those individuals? A fund modeled after programs created in response to national tragedies. Hirono asked directly whether this was happening. Bondi said she had not been involved in any discussions about such a fund. But when Hirono asked whether she supported the idea, Bondi hesitated. That pause spoke volumes. The silence landed harder than a direct answer ever could. Hirono used that moment to lay out what she described as a clear pattern. Case after case where investigations were quietly dropped. Prosecutions that appeared to move forward with unusual urgency. And running beneath it all were reports from inside the department itself. Veteran prosecutors leaving in large numbers, some departing voluntarily, others dismissed after handling politically sensitive cases. She highlighted one especially striking example: a prosecutor who had secured more than 100 convictions, received an outstanding performance review, and was fired just 2 days later without any explanation. This, Hirono argued, went far beyond routine staffing changes. It looked like a deliberate removal of people connected to cases leadership would rather forget. The question in the room became unavoidable: were career prosecutors being pushed out simply for doing their jobs? Bondi refused to address personnel decisions directly. Instead, she pivoted sharply, pointing to alleged misconduct by some employees. She described prosecutors accused of throwing objects at federal officers, staff making obscene gestures, and workers failing to show up in person. Her portrayal was of a department in need of reform, not one engaged in retaliation. The contrast between the two narratives was striking. Hirono described what looked like a purge. Bondi described an agency weighed down by unprofessional behavior. Somewhere between those two versions, the truth seemed to sit just out of reach. Then came the moment that defined the hearing. Hirono looked straight ahead, her voice controlled and deliberate, and delivered a line that sent a chill through the room. She said the Department of Justice had transformed from an institution built on fairness into one driven by retaliation and protection. She cited closed investigations involving powerful allies, aggressive actions against critics, and a growing list of decisions that defied clear explanation. The double standard, she said, was not subtle or debatable. It was unmistakable. In her view, the department no longer pursued justice without fear or favor, but instead shielded the well-connected. While targeting those caught on the wrong side of political power, it went far beyond simple criticism. What Hirono delivered was a direct accusation that the justice system itself had drifted off its intended course. Bondi asked for the chance to respond, and when she did, she didn't attempt to rebut every specific charge. Instead, she reframed the entire conversation. She argued that her critics were ignoring previous years when, in her view, investigations were weaponized for political purposes. Years when allies of the former administration, she said, were unfairly targeted. According to Bondi, the department was now correcting that imbalance and putting an end to what she called a two-tier system of justice. In essence, Hirono accused the Department of Justice of tipping the scales. Bondi countered by accusing Hirono of wanting those scales to remain tilted. Two opposing realities, two sharply different interpretations. One powerful institution caught squarely in the middle. That was the moment the atmosphere shifted from tension to disbelief. Because beyond the political back and forth, one truth became impossible to ignore. Millions of Americans no longer view the Justice Department as an untouchable symbol of neutrality. Instead, it is increasingly seen as an institution that can be influenced, pressured, redirected, or reshaped depending on who holds power. The hearing didn't conceal that divide. It amplified it. As the exchange continued, viewers were left with questions that cut far deeper than any single bill or policy debate. Who decides which investigations move forward and which quietly disappear? Why are some cases dropped without explanation while others are pursued with urgency? How much sway do powerful insiders truly have over decisions meant to be independent? And perhaps most troubling of all, what happens when the public loses faith in the fairness of the system itself? The hearing didn't answer those questions. It exposed the fight over them. The real issue was never just about specific cases, mergers, surveillance authorities, or internal memos. It was about the credibility of an institution that holds the power to decide consequences for everyone else. When justice starts to feel flexible, trust erodes. And once trust is gone, rebuilding it becomes incredibly difficult. That is why the exchange between Hirono and Bondi resonated so strongly. It wasn't just political conflict. It was a mirror held up to a justice system under strain, pulled between its public mission and the private pressures acting on it. And in that moment, the public could see every crack. In the end, the hearing didn't resolve the debate. It didn't restore confidence or bring clarity to the questions still hanging in the air. Instead, it left a message echoing long after the microphones went silent. If justice bends for some, it bends for everyone. What happens next inside the Department of Justice will shape far more than headlines. It will determine whether people continue to believe the law protects all citizens equally, or only those close enough to power. Now it's your turn. Do you think this hearing exposed uncomfortable truths about what's happening inside the Justice Department, or was it simply political theater hiding something even deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more clear, in-depth breakdowns of stories others avoid, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The next video goes even further than this one.